like a 6-minute live stream here for you guys today. Still trying to get back into making content for you guys. So I'm going to make a short live stream, and pretty much what I want to talk about today is machoism versus hedonism. Okay, these are two interesting polarities that I think are very important topics in self-improvement, right? So let's go over these topics and let's kind of deconstruct, if you will, what they're about, and then what we can learn from these ideas, right? So interesting to think about. So let's kind of go over it, right? So the first one I want to go over is hedonism, right? What is the premise of hedonism? So, well, there's no premise of hedonism, rather it's a definition. So hedonism is the notion that there are things, or rather it is a lifestyle pursuit of perpetual pleasures or things, pleasures of the life of the flesh we pursue over discipline, over other things. We don't prioritize goals. We simply pursue this hedonistic pleasures, right? And then this is where the hedonistic treadmill comes into play, right? Which is an interesting thought process, because in the realm of self-improvement, there is no real difference between, or not in self-improvement, but rather in life, there is no objectively right way to live life, right? So like theoretically, you can be like homeless, or you could be a nomad and live just as happy of a life than as a billionaire, right? So what I want to bring forth here is we're always trying to understand the dualities between these sides of life and trying to understand how they work, right? Because we're always going back and forth between these states, right? Between the hedonistic state versus the machoistic state. And then the machoistic state is this notion that pain causes growth, pain causes growth inside of our mind and inside of our thoughts, right? And this is the notion that pain, suffering, or even things that are challenging for us are the things that we should pursue, right? So, in my life, I've explored both sides of the spectrum, right? Hedonism and then machoism, going to the ends of the earth. We could probably think of these analogies in terms of like David Goggins, right? David Goggins, simple example of a guy who pursued machoism during Navy SEAL training, during BUDS, and then he says that, with the accountability mirror, I learned how to hold myself accountable to a set of principle standards by which I can grow as a person. And then there are other people that say, oh no, David Goggins is wrong. He doesn't know what he's talking about. You have to be able to enjoy life. You have to be able to enjoy it. And you have to understand this enjoyment, or like smell the tree, smell the roses, smell the flowers. So then the question is, who is right? Is there a right answer, or is there a wrong answer? Well, if we think about the first thought, that pleasure exists for a functional purpose, and then if we think about, well, suffering also exists for a functional purpose, then this must be that they must have some type of intrinsic value in life, if you will, in order to understand these things, right? Which is interesting to think about, right? I'm trying to think where else I want to go with this. So, when we think about self-improvement, right, it is the notion of improving things that were not improved upon, but yet we keep improving upon it because there is some far off goal we're trying to accomplish. There's a destination, or there's some aspirational objective that we're trying to do, right? And then that leads us to how we traverse to this place, right? So there are other reasons why we might self-improve, but that this is the fundamental premise, I believe, for most people, right? And then there is a whole other category of people that decide not to improve because it's too difficult, too challenging, or it takes too much energy, right? So, and then the interesting thing is, right, is like, do you keep going through these cycles of suffering, or do you go through the cycle, this ritual of suffering, of challenge forever? Or do you kind of take phases of it where you struggle for a while or for a long period of time, and then you just pursue pleasurable ends for the rest of the time, right? And then, as usual, there is no dichotomistic answer to this, right? I can't tell you what the answer is. A dichotomy is the notion that there's a clear divide between the two, but it's unclear what the answer is, right? But I think the answer, as always, is roughly somewhere in the middle, right? It's probably somewhere in the middle, right? It's never really black and white. It's never really as simple as we would like it to be, right? It's like, it just simply, it's not the case, right? It can't be the case that it's going to be this end or this beginning or the start, right? So give me 1 second, guys. Let's think about this in, I want to say, let's think about this in terms of like self-improvement, right? So the answer is probably that, 80% of the time, the answer almost always is to pursue the thing that's hard, pursue the thing that is challenging most of the time, right? But we don't do 100% of the time because you're probably going to burn out, right? Like, frankly speaking, guys, if even the strongest of us have to get a period of either rejuvenation or a moment of fulfillment to sustain the drive. So I think, give me 1 second, guys. Have to be oppositional to one another, right? Most people treat hedonism and machoism as repelling forces. I don't think this is the case, but rather hedonism is a means of enjoying the fruits of the hard labor, but the hard labor affords you the pleasures, and then those pleasures rejuvenates the hard drive. Okay, I believe that is the most harmonious way to live, because if you only pursued machoistic ends, then you would. The problem is, a robot is not a person; it's an ideal. But if you are just meaninglessly pursuing pleasures of end with no start and no beginning, then you're not really creating good for others, right? So does that make sense? So I want you to think about this, because I don't think this is something that's talked about much in self-improvement, right? They tell you that you should have a good work ethic, wake up at 4 a.m, whatever, read hundreds of books. Like, this is all very typical, what I call success porn, success pornography. Be the guy who works harder than everybody else. But it just feels it's very unrealistic. It doesn't it doesn't paint the real picture, right? They don't give you the real analysis, or rather the real thought behind this, and that's that they're not mutually exclusive, they're mutually connected, right? It's like imagine you're a guy who works for 40 years and you don't have a family, right? You could definitely be a guy who works for 40 years and not have a family, but it's a little weird. Like, why would you collect all these resources not to have a family, right? It's a contradiction. So I want you to, as you are improving, rather than saying, am I pursuing hedonistic ends versus machoistic ends, I would say that we are intermittently transitioning between moments or periods of machoistic grinding for temporary moments of pleasures that make life worth living, okay? Because pleasures also make life worth living, as well as the ends of suffering, right? I believe that for true self-improvement, we have to reconcile this paradox, right? I don't think, because if you're just a type A personality 24/7 with no clarity, are you really self-actualized? If you can't feel love, if you cannot feel care, if you're unwilling to be vulnerable for temporary moments, or you're afraid to enjoy something, are you really free, or are you just a slave, right? And I think the person that is the most free can go on both ends of the spectrum. Okay, I like to give a simple analogy of this. I would rather be the guy that can be the hardest working man in the world in the room and be the softest person in the next possible moment, right? I'm always trying to go back and forth on the personality spectrum because I have the ability to do both. I'm not stuck in one single modality state of being. And by doing so, I am much more free than any single person who's on both ends of the spectrum. Okay. I'm not stuck in just the David Goggins mode. I'm not just stuck in like the Aphrodite mode, right? Where Aphrodite, the goddess of love, right? I can turn on my state of will when I decide it, right? It does not control me, right? To be the true master of your life, I believe you should be able to integrate both parts of yourself. Because if you don't do this, and I think in some sense you are living in a state of denial, right? Unless you're just a robot. That's all I have for you for optimizing forward. Tell me what you think of these thoughts, and that's all I have for you guys. Thanks.